Jonah preached and they repented and were blessed, Jonah sulked about it. He didn't think it was fair. And really it wasn't. In our parable story today, Jesus tells about these day workers, the ones who were hired at 6 a.m., who picked grapes all day long, who probably had fingers all scratched up. Their backs were aching from bending over. And yet they were paid the same amount as people who were hired at 5 p.m. who only worked 1 hour. And they didn't think it was fair. And really, it wasn't. Research shows that this concept of fairness is literally built into our DNA. Psychologist Oliver Burkeman said, though, that believing that life is fair can make you a terrible person. And he goes on to explain, he says, there's this myth of fairness that convinces our mind that really life cannot be that unfair. And the people who are unemployed, then they just must be lazy. That somehow the victims of crimes are somehow responsible for that crime. And that natural disasters are a result of God's judgment. And they have even found that those who have this strong conviction in fairness have political beliefs that are more authoritative and oppressive. And psychologists say that it's our way of convincing ourselves, because if life is that unfair, then one of these terrible things could happen to us. Yes. The problem is, in so many ways, life is not fair. And Oscar Wilde said, perhaps it's a good thing for most of us that it is not. Johnny Carson said that if life was fair, Elvis would be alive and all the impersonators would be dead. One time when I was much younger, I got a speeding ticket going down a hill on my way to church on Sunday morning. And I knew it was going to be a burden for me to pay that ticket. And I remember thinking, that is just so unfair. I was angry at the police officer who did not let me off because I was going to church. And I was angry at God, thinking surely God could have intervened because I was doing something so noble. But in reality, if life was fair, I would have hundreds of speeding tickets. Nancy knows. I'm 75, Sunday morning. But almost every day, I wake up with this realization that if things truly were fair, then my income would be less, and people in India would make much more. If life was truly fair, then my wife Carol would not have gotten breast cancer. Right. If life were fair, then I would be able to sing and preach like Nancy Wilson.
You do just fine.
Thank you. You haven't heard me sing yet, though. Until we really come to terms with this, that God has a different standard of fairness than we do, then we will struggle over a lifetime with disappointment with others, possibly even disappointment with God. So our second lesson in our parable today and our scripture readings is to confront our sense of entitlement. Now, many commentaries will look at this parable story and they'll say that Jesus is speaking to his own Jewish people about their sense of entitlement regarding salvation. The first shall be last, and the last shall be first. And that salvation is by grace. It's not about how hard we work or how long we work or what we do. And that certainly is one of the meanings of this parable. But if we stop there, then this parable is nothing more than a nice story where we, the Gentiles, the latecomers, get blessed. And what I have learned about parables is they are very difficult. There are very difficult lessons in parables. Caroline Lewis, a seminary professor, said, the parables are meant to expose, disclose, uncover, and unmask, to wake us up from our complacency. She said, in parables, Jesus persists in telling us the truth about ourselves. And the truth about ourselves in this parable is that most of us are like those first hires. Yeah. I know that I would be. Our mom taught us to be responsible, to show up on time, to put in our amount of work. And I think that Tammy and I probably would be two of them there at 6 a.m. in the morning. And then we would be taken back when people hired at 5 p.m. got the same amount as us. And did you notice that this landowner, the vineyard owner, paid the workers in reverse order? It seemed like he wanted to make sure that those who worked at 6 a.m. noticed what the other workers got. And in this, I think that Jesus makes a point to expose and to confront our sense of entitlement. When I was angry, when I got that speeding ticket, it really wasn't so much about fairness as it was my sense of entitlement. I thought, you know, I'm a churchgoer, I'm young, most of my friends are out on the tennis court or playing softball, or they're sleeping in. Here I am, I'm doing the right thing. I'm going to church, so I should be given special privilege. I shouldn't receive that ticket. This sense of entitlement is embedded in us and in our culture. Entitlement sees other people as competition or as threats. Entitlement causes us to look out for our own needs at the expense of other people's needs. And when we have this attitude of entitlement, we believe that if we are well and healthy enough to put in a full day's work, then others should be able to do that also. And white entitlement, or white privilege, especially believes that my experience of the world is the same as everyone else's experiences, when truly it is not. Those hired at 6 a.m. who worked that full day, understandably felt entitled. But what would it take for us to cheer when those late hires got a blessing? What would it take for us to cheer when someone else wins that Olivia raffle? That's going to be really hard for me to do. Or what would it take for us to cheer if someone simply gets enough food that they need for that day? Or they get the health care that they need for them and their families to survive? Like in the opening video, Dad tells daughter, you don't look into your neighbor's bowl to make sure you have as much as them. You only look in your neighbor's bowl to make sure they have enough. These stories challenge our sense of fairness. They challenge our sense of entitlement. And thirdly, the parable challenges us to model this God of justice and generosity for those people who are at the back of the line. There was a gentleman who arrived at a department store early. It was the day of a big sale, and people lined up before the store even opened. And he got there, it was the end of the line, and he found a way to work his way up to the front. People protested and they said, that's not fair, and they escorted him to the back of the line. Well, he tried it again. He found his way up to the front of the line. He gets up there, and this time people were really angry, and they start pushing him and assaulting him and yelling at him, and they push him this time all the way to the back of the line. And he said, okay, that's it. If they don't let me up there this time, I'm never opening that store for them. This parable reads much differently if you are the ones at the back of the line. Most Jewish people of the first century were peasants, and they worked in agricultural fields as day laborers like those in our story today. Economically, they encountered poverty, heavy taxation. They were under Roman rule, and so they encountered racism and were politically marginalized. Pablo Jimenez pastored the church in Atlanta, and he says his congregation in Atlanta relates very well to this parable because they often are the ones at the back of the line. He said in his congregation are the desempleados, the unemployed Latinos who stand at the intersection of busy streets waiting for somebody to offer them $20 in exchange for doing house or yard chores. Those of his congregation are Raquel helped me with this, the Niñas and the Surdientes, the Latinas who provide child care and housekeeping for the affluent. In his congregation are the braceros, the migrant agricultural workers who travel from state to state picking crops. And the obreros, providing cheap labor in construction and custodial jobs. And in his congregation are those Dream Act kids who were brought to the United States by parents, and they don't know any other country. So I asked, what is God's response today to our current day laborers? The ones who are often told that they deserve no better, that things are not fair. And how do these people challenge our sense of fairness and our sense of entitlement? Well, for the vineyard owner in our story, the way of justice was paying those latecomers a full daily wage. Because if they did not receive a full daily wage, they and their families would not eat for that day, literally. Justice is being the landowner who goes back to that marketplace 4 more times to find those who needed work. Justice is taking in the ones who had not been hired earlier in the day because they may have been considered the least desirable. And like this landowner, God is a just and a generous God. And so this difficult parable does speak to us and reminds us to be like God, the generous landowner. And instead of clinging so hard to this notion of fair-mindedness, we are called to work on behalf of true fairness and justice. And instead of asserting that the world is fair and just, we are to help make it so. We are called to clear the way for those who are at the back of the line. Because when we do that, I believe that all of us benefit. All of us are blessed. And the store gets open for all of us. And we do this, first of all, because it's the godly thing to do. But we also do it because there have been times when we were at the back of the line. There have been times when we have been idle and were without purpose. And God came looking for us in the marketplace. God comes looking at 6 a.m. comes back at 9 a.m. God comes looking for us at noon, at 3 p.m., and at 5 p.m. And whenever we show up, we find a God of grace, and a God of justice, and a God of great generosity. Thank God. Let us pray. God, we thank you for these stories that challenge us, but speak to us. And we ask, God, that you will help us to be like you, like that generous employer, that generous landowner, who comes looking for us and reminds us to also go looking for others in Jesus' name. Amen.